Okay, so now we're going to talk about show note templating. Show notes are present in every episode, and I didn't think to say it before, but obviously we could have added a show note section to Podcast Studio Pro, and with each new episode, we load that template, confirm. We could just now copy and paste that over here so that the show notes always have like this, standard format to them. But what do we want our show notes to look like? Well, let's start here, and then we'll go into Sounder, and we'll talk about what I do for Practical Stoicism for my show notes, because this works just as well. So I could go into show notes and I could say, well, let me jump into this interview. I always want my show notes to contain a few things, right? I always want my show notes to contain, in fact, let's walk over to Sounder and give you a real life example. Manage podcast. We can just look at my most recent episode, manage. Let's close that. And all of this is repeated in every episode that I publish. In fact, I do kind of not a great job at making really detailed show notes. And that might be because this podcast only has 10-minute episodes, which are pretty short, and it's kind of hard to say too much without, saying all of it. But I will go ahead and highlight and copy all these and get them on to Podcast Studio Pro so that you can more clearly see them. Copy, paste. And I'll reduce the font size here to 9. And here you can I say, support this podcast by subscribing to the ad-free and preamble-free AMA-enabled version here. So that's one thing I always include, a call to any premium offerings that the podcast might have. But before this should go text from cold open. And I like to put that in brackets just so I know it's something I'm getting from somewhere else. This week's meditation will be reading and going over the X meditation from book X of the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Then I put a little divider in there. You don't have to. I do, though. Purchase and review my book, Practical Stoicism, on Amazon. There's my link. It's always there. Review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, review this podcast on Spotify Podcasts, review this podcast on Podchaser, and then some reference notes. The book I read these meditations from right here. This is an affiliate link, so it's always good to have one of those if it applies in some way. Reach out to me with questions at my email address. So this is something that is always in my show notes. I copy and paste this into every episode of this podcast. So now I could just copy and paste this into every episode of the podcast on Podcast Studio Pro. But at the same time, since we're using Sounder, or I'm assuming you're using Sounder, I could just always, when I create a new episode, click OK. Great, I'm creating a new episode. And then I'm going to hit Control and click Episodes. And then I'll just go to my last episode, hit Manage, and copy it. And then go into my new episode and paste it. So there you go. It's not automatic, but it's pretty fast. It didn't take me but a few seconds. And some podcast hosting providers will actually allow you to create a template that just automatically loads whenever you hit add a new episode, which Sounder is currently working on as a feature, but it's not as high priority as some other ones. So you can do this inside of Podcast Studio Pro or Google Docs or ClickUp or any of those other options, but you can also just do it by, creating a standard in one episode and then copy and pasting it to every other episode. And then the only thing that really changes in the show notes is, the cold open text here that you would add every time. So really not much to creating a template for show notes. You will notice that I also said something that should be included in show notes, but that I don't include a link to here specifically, and that's because Sounder does it automatically for me. Is a transcript. So if I go to any single one of my episodes for Practical Stoicism, we'll just open up this one here, and I scroll and I click to transcribe. Well, this episode was actually already transcribed automatically. So I just have a transcript here, and that transcript in these players are actually searchable. So I could actually search the player for part of the word, and this makes it much more accessible for people who are in need of that kind of thing. But I can also grab, download, or copy the transcript here and use it on my website. So with Sounder in particular, it's probably not necessary to have a link to your transcript because it's built into the player. However, if you wanted to, you could copy this and paste it onto the episode page on the website, on your website, and you could just link to that. And so you would add in your show notes something like link to transcript of this episode. And then it might be your website / episode 6 or, whatever, E5 or whatever you want to name the page that it appears on. And that's it. That's really all there is to creating a show notes template. But notice if you had to type this every time, my God, that would be exhausting. So make it easy on yourself, create one version of it, copy paste it with kind of fill in the blank changes. Like for example, I put X meditation from book X so that I can say 13th meditation the next time from book 3 or 4 or whatever it is. Okay, so we'll go over additional templates and additional videos. That's up next. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.